There is something deeply enigmatic about the figure of the Horsemen of the Apocalypse. These four entities, so vivid in John's vision on Patmos, seem to pass through the centuries like an echo that never goes silent. Each of them, with their symbolic presence, carries meanings that go beyond what the eyes can capture. Why, after all, do these nights continue to arouse fascination and fear? Maybe it's because, somewhere deep down, we all feel his prophecies whisper truths that surround us every day. Now click like, subscribe to the channel. It will only take a second, and you will help us a lot. John, isolated on that arid island, received a revelation that seemed destined for eternity. In describing the horsemen, he not only painted a bleak picture of the future, but also offered a mirror to the present. War, hunger, death, aren't these elements so familiar to us? It's as if the nights ride, not only into the future, but also through the pages of history. They are in the books we read, in the headlines that give us goosebumps, in the curiosities of history that make us question, are we already living in your apocalypse? It's no wonder these figures have become icons of popular culture. From films that dramatize the end times to heated religious debates, the Horsemen of the Apocalypse are present everywhere. There are those who see them as divine warnings and others as mere metaphors. But whatever the interpretation, one thing is certain. They confront us with our greatest weaknesses, and that is something impossible to ignore. And so, each night, with their striking characteristics, brings to light issues that transcend generations. They invite us, or perhaps challenge us, to look at the world with more attentive eyes. But what do their presences really mean? What is the hidden message they carry? And why, to this day, do their figures remain so present in our imagination? To answer these questions, we need to watch each seal being broken, one by one. When the first seal is broken, the White Knight appears, riding a steed as pure as light. In his hands, a bow and a crown. He is, at the same time, fascinating and intriguing, a figure that has divided interpretations since ancient times. Some see it as a symbol of divine leadership, while others believe it represents conquest and dominion. The duality of its essence challenges us to look beyond appearances and ask ourselves, who really is this knight who rides under the white flag? The bow he carries is curious. There are no arrows visible, as if his victory was not through brute force, but through something more subtle and powerful. This makes us reflect on the power of ideas and ideals that shape nations, tear down borders, and create empires. The White Knight reminds us that not all wars are fought with swords. Some are defeated with words, others with ideologies. Is this knight already among us, in charismatic leaders, or movements that transform history? The crown on his head is a reminder that power can be both a blessing and a curse. Leadership requires responsibility, but it can also corrupt. How many leaders throughout the ages began their journeys as saviors and ended as tyrants? From the great empires of antiquity to modern leaders who have guided masses with impassioned speeches, the White Knight seems to be always present, influencing the balance between good and evil. And as he rides, we leave one question hanging in the air. Is he a symbol of hope or a harbinger of domination? This ambiguity is what makes White Knight so intriguing. However, as we progress, the other seals break, revealing knights with even darker purposes. What secrets will the next seal hold? When the second seal is broken, the world turns red. The Knight of War appears, mounted on his scarlet horse, wielding a sword that seems to reflect the blood spilled by countless generations. This is no silent knight. Their presence is marked by the clamor of battle and the terrifying sound of conflict that echoes across the planet. Its purpose is clear, to remove peace from the earth. But is it just a metaphor? Or is its essence still alive in the disputes we still witness today? The red that surrounds it is a potent symbol. It is the color of passion, but also of violence and chaos. It is impossible not to associate his figure with the great wars that shaped the history of humanity. From the battlefields of antiquity to modern conflicts, the Red Knight seems to ride relentlessly, leaving a trail of destruction and deception in his wake. And now, in times of weapons of mass destruction, hasn't his sword become even more threatening? The sword he carries is not just a weapon, but a symbol of power and division. On its blade, decisions that led nations to ruin and families to separation are reflected. It cuts ties, breaks alliances, and spreads fear. Think about contemporary conflicts, civil wars, geopolitical tensions, and even internal battles within polarized societies. The Red Knight does not need a battlefield to act. It finds fertile ground in the hearts of men and women. And as he rides, peace seems to become a distant, almost unattainable dream. Is its presence inevitable? Or is there a way to halt its march? Before we answer, the next seal reveals something even darker. A knight who fights not with swords, but with hunger and scarcity. The third seal breaks, and the world is plunged into darkness. Mounted on a black horse, the Horseman of Hunger appears, holding a scale in his hands. It is not a scale of justice, but of inequality, where the weight of scarcity and abundance is cruelly unbalanced. His arrival is marked by the clamor of voices that echo, a kilo of wheat for a day's work. The message is clear, the cost of survival is high, and hunger makes no distinctions, but its impact is always heaviest on the weakest. The scale, in its simplicity, carries a deep meaning. It symbolizes the imbalance of humanity, where few have much, and many have almost nothing. Think of financial markets, empty shelves during crises, and the daily struggle of millions for a piece of bread. Isn't it curious how recent global events, such as pandemics and conflicts, reveal how vulnerable the system that sustains our society is? The Black Knight reminds us that hunger is not just the absence of food, but the presence of inequality. And it's not just physical hunger. There is a hunger for justice, for opportunities, for dignity. In a world where food is wasted while people die from malnutrition, the figure of the Black Knight provokes us to reflect. What can we do to balance this scale? Small gestures, such as donating to those in need or consuming consciously, can be resistance against your progress. After all, a balanced scale begins with the weight of our own choices. And so, as he rides, the impact of hunger multiplies, affecting bodies, minds, and souls. But the next knight who appears brings with him something even more terrifying: death, in its most merciless and universal form. When the fourth seal is broken, the scenario becomes even darker. The Yellow Knight appears, riding a pale, almost translucent horse, as if he carries with him the very essence of death. He doesn't ride alone. At his side comes Hell, ready to collect the souls left in his wake. This is the night that no one wants to face, but that everyone inevitably encounters. Their presence is a cruel reminder of the fragility of life and the common destiny we all share. His horse's pale hue reflects diseases and pestilence that have ravaged humanity for generations. From the Black Death, which wiped out millions, to recent pandemics such as COVID-19, the Yellow Knight seems to be always present. Its strength lies not only in death itself, but in the fear it generates. It is impossible not to remember the images of crowded hospitals, empty streets, and faces covered by masks. He shows us that no matter how advanced we are still vulnerable to their relentless march. But the Yellow Knight is not limited to illnesses. It also symbolizes mortality in its most comprehensive form: wars, natural disasters, and even everyday accidents. Every tragedy, big or small, is a reflection of your presence. And when we look at the curiosities of history, we realize how he shaped civilizations, forcing societies to adapt or perish in the face of his passage. And as he advances, with hell at his side, the question that echoes is, are we really prepared to face it? But before we look for an answer, we need to go back to the beginning, where all these revelations began. Who was John, the man who saw all this? And how did his visions influence the history and faith of millions? John, the author of Revelation, was in exile on the island of Patmos, a desolate place surrounded by the Aegean Sea. There, in the midst of isolation and silence, he had visions that changed the course of the Christian faith. His words were not just messages of destruction, they brought hope, instruction, and warning. John lived under the Roman Empire, a time of persecution of Christians. His revelations, therefore, spoke directly to the persecuted, but also reached future generations. He was not just a prophet, but a narrator of mysteries that echo to this day. The night's vision was just one part of a series of broader revelations. John saw seals being broken, trumpets being blown, and cups being spilled. Each of these events was loaded with symbolism. For early Christians, these messages were like a spiritual survival map. In a time of darkness, where believing in Christ was risking one's life, the apocalypse served as a reminder that suffering would have an end. It's as if John said, "Persist, for victory will come." Over the centuries, John's message crossed borders and continents. It influenced not only religion, but also culture, art, and even politics. From cathedrals carved with apocalyptic scenes to social movements that use the apocalypse as inspiration, its influence is undeniable. Even religious wars were justified based on his visions, proving that the power of his words went beyond the context of his time. And so, John's revelations became more than a book. They have become an enigma for humanity to decipher. But, at the same time as he described the end, he also spoke of renewal. This leads us to wonder, how have these prophecies been interpreted over the centuries? What impact have they had on past eras? And how have they shaped the way we see the future? The horsemen of the apocalypse are not just figures from a sacred text. Throughout history, they have become lenses through which different generations have viewed their own challenges. In the Middle Ages, for example, the Black Death was directly associated with the Black Knight, and the endless wars that ravaged Europe seemed to confirm the presence of the Red Knight. For the people of that time, the knights were not distant metaphors, but palpable presences in their lives. It was as if each crisis was a reminder that the seals had already begun to be broken. However, with the Protestant Reformation, interpretations of the knights gained new depth. Reformers such as Martin Luther saw the knights as a criticism of the corrupt system of the Catholic Church. For them, the knights were figures who announced divine judgment, not only on the world, but also on religious institutions that had strayed from their purpose. This period of history shows how John's prophecies were moldable, adapting to the contexts and concerns of each era. During the 20th century, with its world wars and technological advances, the knights gained even more relevance. The First World War, with its trenches and mass destruction, seemed to be a direct reflection of the Red Knight's influence. Already the Great Depression echoed the power of the Black Knight, bringing hunger and inequality on a global scale. And, in the shadows of pandemics like the Spanish flu, the Yellow Knight seemed to whisper its presence. Modern history has intertwined with apocalyptic visions in stunning ways. And so, with each new crisis, the knights return to our imagination, as if they rode restlessly through the centuries. But what about today? Are the signs we see around us mere coincidences? Or is there something deeper going on? This question leads us to modern prophecies and recent events that seem to resonate with John's revelations. The horsemen of the apocalypse, although rooted in an ancient text, seem to find impressive echoes in modernity. Wars, pandemics, climate change, and economic crises are like chapters in a book unfolding before our eyes. Some recent events, such as the emergence of global conflicts and devastating natural disasters, make us question, Are we seeing John's prophecies come to life in our era? There are those who believe that the seals continue to be broken, one by one. Think of the nuclear tensions and armed conflicts that threaten world peace. The Red Knight, with his sword, seems to be more present than ever. At the same time, the Black Knight, with his scales, reminds us of the glaring inequalities that emerge amid financial crises and scarcity of resources. Who could ignore the headlines about hunger affecting millions, even in a world where abundance seems to be the norm? There's no denying it. The Knights find fertile ground in the complexity of the modern world. What about pandemics? The Yellow Knight seems to have manifested himself in a frighteningly literal way in recent years. Unexpected and emerging diseases like COVID-19 confront us with our vulnerability. Even with all the technology and scientific advances, we are still fragile in the face of microscopic viruses. And as science struggles to control pandemics, people look to the heavens and sacred texts for answers, trying to connect the dots between prophecies and current events. However, modern prophecies are not limited to fear and destruction. They also bring a call to action, an opportunity to reevaluate our role in the world. And as we look at the signs around us, the question arises, are the threats we face today inevitable? Or is there something we can do to change the course of history? This reflection leads us to consider contemporary fears and the impact of the Knights on our vision of the future. In a world interconnected like never before, the Horsemen of the Apocalypse find new ways to speak to the fears of the present. The Red Knight, which once symbolized local wars, is today reflected in global-scale conflicts and geopolitical tensions that threaten global stability. Think about the possibility of nuclear conflict, or the invisible technological battles where governments and organizations fight for control of information. The fear of global war has never been more tangible, and the Red Knight seems to ride faster than we imagine. Food insecurity, represented by the Black Knight, has become a glaring concern in times of crisis. Climate change, natural disasters, and weak economic policies result in hunger and shortages for millions. It is not just the lack of food, but also unequal access, that makes this fear a reality for so many people. Today, when we look at lines of families seeking help at food banks, we may wonder, is the Black Knight closer than we think? And the Yellow Knight? Its reflection can be seen in modern pandemics and the collapse of healthcare systems. We live in a time when global health is constantly threatened, whether by new viruses or previously eradicated diseases that are returning with force. Furthermore, fear of epidemics creates a collective anxiety that paralyzes us. The recent pandemic has shown us that, despite our advances, we are all vulnerable to the unexpected. But perhaps the greatest contemporary fear lies in the way technology amplifies these nights. False information, disseminated in a matter of seconds, can cause panic on a global scale. Conflict, scarcity, and pandemics become narratives that shape our lives, often with more fear than hope. And so, the question remains, how can we face these fears as we continue to live under the shadows of the Horsemen of the Apocalypse? The answer may lie in the role of nations and governments, and how much they can or cannot do to contain these threats. The Horsemen of the Apocalypse, in their symbolism, challenge nations and governments to face the crises that shape history. Since time immemorial, leaders have carried the responsibility of protecting their people against war, famine, and disease. But, in a world where political interests often override human needs, to what extent have governments fulfilled this role? It is as if the Knights found power struggles to be the ideal terrain to sow destruction. The Red Knight is a clear reflection of the failures of geopolitics. Wars are fought not just with weapons, but with economic embargoes, diplomatic tensions, and silent interventions. Think about current conflicts. Many could be avoided, but they remain fueled by divisions and ideological disputes. Nations that should act as mediators become catalysts for conflicts. And so, the Red Knight's sword seems sharper than ever. The Black Knight challenges governments with the weight of inequality, control of natural resources, poor food distribution, and market manipulation worsen global insecurity. While some nations enjoy abundance, others struggle to provide the basics to their citizens. Hunger, often treated as inevitable, is often the consequence of inadequate policies. Small actions, like encouraging local agriculture and promoting equity in markets, could be effective shields against this night. And when the Yellow Knight emerges, public health systems are put to the test. Recent pandemics have shown that international collaboration is essential, but they have also highlighted glaring gaps. Governments that invest in prevention are able to mitigate damage, while those that neglect health see their populations succumb. The lesson the Knights teach us is clear. Leadership, responsibility, and global cooperation are the only weapons capable of stopping their march. But as governments struggle to balance these demands, the question arises: to what extent are they able to deal with the challenges the Knights bring? And more importantly, how can faith, beliefs, and religions influence decisions in the face of these crises? Religions play a key role in how humanity interprets the Horsemen of the Apocalypse. In Christianity, they are seen as divine messengers, symbols of a cosmic order about to be revealed. But what about other traditions? In Islam, for example, apocalyptic prophecies also address final judgment, while in Judaism, the vision of a transformed world echoes the same fears and hopes described in Revelation. It's fascinating how different faiths share a historical curiosity for this imminent end. Religions don't just interpret the horsemen, they shape how people respond to their symbolic presences. Faith offers a foundation, a point of stability in the midst of chaos. During pandemics or wars, many people turn to their beliefs for meaning and strength. In times of famine, religious institutions have historically been pillars of humanitarian aid. Churches, mosques, and synagogues become refuges, places where hope still flourishes, even when everything around them seems to be falling apart. However, the influence of religions is not without controversy. Throughout history, religious leaders have used the Knights as tools to justify questionable actions. Crusades, persecutions, and even modern wars carried apocalyptic interpretations on their flags. Here, the question arises: to what extent do the Knights' religious interpretations reflect a call for spiritual transformation, and to what extent are they manipulated to suit human agendas? And so, religions stand as a compass in times of uncertainty. They guide billions of people, but they also raise questions about power and interpretation. The apocalypse, far from being just a report of destruction, is an invitation to reflect on our existence and what is to come. But, while beliefs shape perspectives, how do the Knights manifest themselves in the collective imagination through popular culture? The Horsemen of the Apocalypse, despite their biblical origins, have transcended the pages of Scripture to become cultural icons. Films, series, books, and even electronic games present them as symbols of imminent chaos. In works like The Seventh Seal, or contemporary series that explore the apocalypse, they appear as protagonists or metaphors for human dilemmas. This popularity is no coincidence. The Knights reflect the fears and uncertainties that permeate society, connecting the past to the present in a fascinating way. In literature, they are often reinterpreted. From classics like Apocalypse Now to fantasy works that explore the end of the world, the Horsemen appear in many forms. Its symbolism, adapted to different contexts, remains relevant, especially in times of crisis. Why do stories involving destruction and rebirth attract audiences so much? Perhaps because, between the lines, they talk more about hope than destruction. In music and art, the Knights evoke a dark, almost hypnotizing energy. Rock and heavy metal bands, for example, often reference them in lyrics that question the fate of humanity. Renaissance paintings, such as those by Albrecht Dürer, present their figures in frighteningly lifelike detail. These elements in popular culture not only expand the reach of prophecies, but also shape the way contemporary generations view the apocalypse. And so, the knights continue to ride, not only in sacred texts, but also in the heart of mass culture. They remind us that the apocalypse is not just about destruction, but also about the rebirth of ideas and perspectives. However, while art helps us explore their essence, there is another field where science and faith collide around these figures. Questions about the interpretation and application of their prophecies in the real world. When we talk about the horsemen of the apocalypse, it is impossible to ignore the point where science and religion meet. On the one hand, John's revelations present a narrative full of symbolism and spirituality. On the other, science seeks rational explanations for events such as pandemics, climate change, and economic crises. Although they may seem opposite, these perspectives often intersect, offering a more complete view of the world. After all, isn't it possible to learn as much from sacred texts as from scientific discoveries? The recent pandemic is a clear example of this dialogue. While religious people saw it as a sign of the Yellow Night, scientists warned of the importance of prevention and research. Vaccines, treatments, and healthcare systems were the practical response to what many interpreted as a fulfilled prophecy. This balance between spirituality and science shows that faith does not need to override reason. On the contrary, together, they can offer solutions that touch both the body and the soul. The same goes for natural disasters like earthquakes and hurricanes, which some consider to be apocalyptic signs. Science explains these catastrophes with geological and climatic data, while religion interprets them as divine warnings. These visions may seem conflicting, but they both drive us to act. While science suggests mitigation policies, faith calls us to introspect and care for others. It is at this point that science and religion become complementary, guiding our choices in the face of crises. And so, the horsemen of the apocalypse show us that there is no single way to interpret humanity's challenges. Whether through faith, science, or both, the important thing is the search for answers and actions that help us face what is to come. But what about the signs? These phenomena that seem to connect the heavens to the earth, the past to the present. What do they really tell us? Throughout history, humanity has looked to the heavens for answers. Eclipses, comets, and meteor showers were seen as omens of something bigger, as if the universe was trying to warn us. For many, these events are divine signs, a direct connection between what is above and what is to come. And when we think about the horsemen of the apocalypse, it is impossible not to associate them with these phenomena. After all, isn't it in great tragedies and cosmic signs that we seek explanations for what we cannot understand? In the Bible, earthquakes and natural disasters often accompany important revelations. They are described as manifestations of God's power, marking the end of cycles and the beginning of new times. And what about recent phenomena? Think about the devastating hurricanes, the floods that take over entire cities, and the volcanoes that awaken with fury. It's as if the earth is crying out for attention, a reminder that we are just a part of something much bigger. But it's not just the visible signs that impact us. There are also those that we feel in our hearts, such as fear, anxiety, and the feeling that something is about to happen. These feelings, fueled by powerful news and images, make the signs even more personal. It's as if every earthquake, every eclipse, speaks directly to us. For many, these moments are invitations to reflection, change, and spiritual preparation. And as we look to the heavens and feel the tremors beneath our feet, the question remains, are we really paying attention to the signs? Are they mere natural phenomena, or is there something deeper going on? Before answering, perhaps we should explore how these signs impact our minds and spirits, fueling fear and expectation in an already chaotic world. The fear of the end is a shadow that has accompanied us since the beginning of humanity. Why does the apocalypse occupy such a significant space in our minds? Maybe it's because it forces us to confront mortality, both our own and that of the world as we know it. The horsemen of the apocalypse are not just biblical figures. They are reflections of our greatest fears: war, hunger, disease, and death. It is fascinating how the human brain reacts to these narratives, amplifying anxieties that are already present in everyday life. In times of crisis, such as wars or pandemics, people tend to look for answers to their anxieties. The apocalypse offers an almost comforting explanation. It's not just chance, it's part of something bigger, a plan. This belief, although frightening, can bring a sense of purpose. After all, if we are living in the last days, our actions gain weight. This mentality is visible throughout history, when moments of collective despair were marked by apocalyptic prophecies and predictions. But the apocalypse also has a profound psychological impact. It forces us to question what really matters. When faced with the end, priorities change. Money, status, and material ambitions lose value in the face of the idea that time is running out. Studies show that in times of crisis, people tend to strengthen family ties and seek comfort in faith communities. It is as if, when looking into the abyss, we turn to what is most human. And as we navigate these emotions, one question persists. Does the fear of the apocalypse paralyze us or motivate us to act? Perhaps the answer lies in the balance between understanding our anxieties and transforming them into meaningful actions. But before exploring how we respond to the apocalypse in the present, it's worth looking to the past and understanding how other prophecies influenced previous eras. After all, history is full of curiosities that echo the same universal fear. Long before John's visions in the apocalypse, humanity was already poring over prophecies and predictions that tried to unravel the mysteries of the future. Nostradamus, with his enigmatic quatrains, is one of the most famous examples. His words, often open to multiple interpretations, fed generations with the idea that the destiny of humanity was written, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And, interestingly, many of their predictions seem to echo the same anxieties represented by the horsemen. The connection between the horsemen and other global prophecies is no mere coincidence. Ancient civilizations, such as the Mayans and Egyptians, also left records of an imminent end. The Mayan calendar, for example, was interpreted as a countdown to the apocalypse in 2012. Although the world did not end on that date, the fascination with these predictions demonstrates how the idea of a global end transcends cultures and eras. The nights, in this context, become a universal language to describe our greatest concerns. In the Middle Ages, prophecies gained even more strength. Major events, such as the Black Death and religious wars, were seen as signs that the apocalypse was at hand. Texts such as the Liber Mirabilis, a compilation of medieval prophecies, reinforced this view. Each tragedy was interpreted as the fulfillment of a prophetic word. This search for answers in times of crisis is a recurring trait of humanity, an almost instinctive need to find meaning in chaos. And so, the prophecies of other times continue to intrigue us. They show us that although the world has changed, our questions remain the same. Are we prepared for what is to come? Before answering, it's important to consider not only the impact of these predictions on history, but also how they shape our everyday lives, influencing families, communities, and even global decisions. When the shadows of the apocalypse become part of everyday conversations, it is natural that they directly impact families and communities. Fear of the unknown can unite people, but it can also create divisions. Think about times of crisis, such as during pandemics or wars. While some families grow stronger in the search for mutual support, others find themselves consumed by internal tensions, fueled by collective anxiety. The horsemen of the apocalypse, although symbolic, have the power to alter human dynamics in surprising ways. Religious communities in particular play a crucial role in these moments. Often, it is temples, churches, and mosques that offer a welcoming space where the fear of the apocalypse is transformed into hope. On the other hand, it is important to recognize how extreme interpretations of prophecies can create isolation or even radicalization. The balance between faith and reason is fundamental for these communities to be true refuges and not sources of further fear. Within families, the impact is even more intimate. Discussions about the future, how to protect loved ones, or how to deal with uncertainty become common. In times of crisis, parents look for ways to explain the inexplicable to their children, while younger people try to understand a world that always seems to be on the verge of something great or catastrophic. It is in these moments that values such as unity, resilience, and empathy become essential. Simple gestures, like sharing meals or praying together, can make all the difference. And so, as prophecies shape human relationships, it becomes clear that the apocalypse is not just about destruction, but also about transformation. It is in the bonds between people that we find the strength to face the unknown. But looking ahead, what do the prophecies still hold? What challenges and hopes can they bring to future generations? The future is a blank page, but prophecies seem to be the paints that fill it with tones of mystery and expectation. The horsemen of the apocalypse, as symbols, continue to ride through our imagination, suggesting that there is more to come. What has not yet been fulfilled in the Revelations? The world is in a constant state of transformation, and each new global event seems to align in some way with John's visions. Are we approaching the end, or are these prophecies just timeless reminders about the cycles of humanity? The new generations, connected in a global information network, view these prophecies in a curious and often skeptical way. For some, the nights are metaphors for problems we can solve with science and technology. For others, they are clear signs that something bigger is unfolding. This duality creates fertile ground for debates, where the future is analyzed both in the light of faith and reason. But can we really predict what comes next, or are we just reacting to the unknown? The important thing, perhaps, is not to predict the future, but to prepare for it. The message implicit in the prophecies is not just one of warning, but one of transformation. They invite us to reflect on how we are living and to correct our ways before it is too late. Small gestures, such as caring for the environment, supporting vulnerable communities, and seeking the truth in times of misinformation, can be the steps that take us away from the apocalypse and closer to a more balanced future. And as we look to the horizon, there is one certainty that remains. The future will be shaped by our choices. Whether individual or collective, it is these decisions that will define whether the nights will continue to ride or whether we will find a new path. But to do so, we need to learn from the lessons they bring us. After all, what teachings do the nights offer about our own humanity? The horsemen of the apocalypse, in all their symbolism, carry messages that go beyond fear and destruction. They are mirrors that reflect our failures, but also the possibilities of redemption. The White Knight reminds us of the power and responsibility that come with leadership. The red, of the futility of war. Black, of the inequalities that divide us. And yellow, of the fragility of life. They challenge us to question our choices as individuals and as a society. One of the greatest lessons the Knights teach us is the importance of unity. In times of crisis, whether personal or global, we are stronger when we act together. Wars, Pandemics and famine do not choose sides, and facing them requires collaboration. History is full of interesting facts about how humanity overcame seemingly insurmountable challenges when it came together. The same principle applies to the present. Collective actions can change the course of events. Another important teaching is the need for balance. The Black Knight, with his scales, reminds us that inequalities are a human creation. When we reflect on this, we realize that we have the power to balance this scale, whether through daily choices, such as consuming consciously, or supporting initiatives that combat hunger and poverty. Every small gesture is a resistance against the impacts of this night. And so, the Horsemen show us that the apocalypse is not just about the end, but about new beginnings. They invite us to look within, identify our weaknesses, and seek improvements. The question remains, will we learn from its messages or ignore them until it is too late? Before answering, we need to reflect on the fine line between fear and hope, where the nights leave us on the brink of a choice. The horsemen of the apocalypse continue to ride, not only in John's visions, but also in our minds and hearts. They are living reminders that the world, with all its beauty and imperfections, is in constant motion. The fear they evoke is not an end in itself, but a call to action. They challenge us to look at the chaos and find purpose, to transform despair into hope, and to meet the challenges of our times with courage and compassion. In times of crisis, it is easy to give in to the idea that the apocalypse is inevitable. But just as the book of Revelation ends with the promise of a new Jerusalem, our lives can also be transformed. Every decision we make, every act of kindness, is a small resistance against the nights. They show us that even in the darkest hours, there is the possibility of light and renewal. After all, the apocalypse doesn't have to be the end, but it can be a new beginning. The role of faith, science, and collective action is crucial in this process. It is by balancing these elements that we find a way to move forward, without ignoring the warnings, but also without surrendering to fear. The horsemen are both warnings and invitations to transformation. They remind us that as long as there is life, there will be choice, and as long as there is choice, there will be hope. And now, the question is yours. How will you face the challenges of the present? Allow the lessons of the nights to inspire concrete action in your life. And as you reflect on this, remember that each of us has the power to make a difference, even in the midst of the storms.
If you're interested in having a Bible like the one we use in our studies, check out the link in the first pinned comment. If you enjoy our content and can support our channel, consider buying us a coffee through Buy Me a Coffee. Additionally, if you can purchase a crucifix, we also have a link in the first pinned comment. We greatly appreciate your support. God bless, and see you in the next video.